There's still much debate about that, but I'm a transplant. Sawyers. I'm still transplant, so I don't always get it right. Well, up to this point, let me ask, just for a show of hands, have you been getting questions answered thus far? Okay, good. Okay, good. Now, there's a systematic way to approach this. We could do question and answer, and we may have some time. Well, we've been having a question and answer session afterwards anyway. But we may have more time Thursday night, and certainly for Friday night we'll have a lot of time too, and pick up a lot of loose ends. But I have been going through some of the questions that have been written down, and some of you have been asking me questions. Is it a waste of time to learn about evolution? Some people feel like it is a waste of time, but actually this is a very, very important topic to learn about, and here's why. And it's not something that everyone will be a specialist in. My training, God has used me in the field of science. That's where I was saved out of. That's the community I've been ministering to ever since 1974. So that is my community. That's my field of ministry, and I feel very comfortable and at home in that area. And it's not the place for everybody, but then Alaska isn't for everyone, is it? Yeah. Well, some think everybody ought to be up here. But it's beautiful country, and I've really been enjoying the sights and just the experience of being here in Alaska. But it's not a waste of time to learn about evolution. Here's why. In my own personal experience, I was an atheist, trained in evolution. That's where I was coming from when I met a man who could answer my questions about God. And I dealt with some of the issues of evolution, and because he had an answer, see, when I say that, a verse comes to mind. Do you remember what verse that is? I've been mentioning it each night. That's right. 1 Peter 3:15. But sanctify the Lord God in your heart.
No, I mean from Barry.
Oh, okay.
For a second. Go ahead and talk.
All right. 1 Peter 3:15 says, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be prepared always to give an answer to every man that asks the reason of the hope that lies within you. That is the reason why we really are responsible as Christians to learn about evolution, as a number of other things. I specialize in this area. I don't specialize in all areas. But some of you will have your areas of specialty. And then I'll come and listen to you speak on your area so I can be better equipped to provide an answer to every man that asks of the reason of the hope that lies within me. So having said that, evolution is very important to learn about. It's not a waste of time, because what we're doing here is we're learning how to present an answer, a reasonable answer to people. That we know that talking about creation and evolution isn't going to save us all, but I will guarantee you this, that because people prior to meeting Chuck Schwartz could not answer my questions, I was convinced there wasn't a God. I was convinced there wasn't a God, and came to that conclusion because no one had answers to my questions. And it led me to conclude the reason why there are no answers is because there's no answers to be found. If there's no God in existence, then how can we possibly expect to have answers about God or this entity that does not exist? So that was the reasoning that I used for my atheism, and felt comfortable in that. It was I was talking to someone last night about that. I was much more comfortable choosing not to believe in God than to be in this quandary of, I wonder if there is a God. I mean, it just drove me crazy. I didn't care what the answer was. I just wanted to have it settled. I did have one thing on my mind, and that was, if there is a God, I'd like to know who He is and what He expects of me. And I was eager all through high school. I was searching. I was asking people. looking back, I had a number of people who were trying to witness to me. And I would ask them my questions. But the problem was, I would not hear the gospel. My eyes were shut and my ears were plugged up because I was not getting the answers that I needed to satisfy me and help me, prepare me to hear the gospel. See, I needed to have those nagging questions answered in my life. And this is why we learn about creation and evolution. Dealing with apologetics for 30 years, I find that there are a lot of people who are asking tough questions or hard questions, sincere questions. I was there. If someone would just give me an answer, you know, that's what I was looking for. And even though the issue of creation and evolution does not save the soul, it is an important barrier to knock down so that people will be open then, as I was, okay, well, share the gospel with them. And that's what Chuck was able to do. Now, Sir Arthur Keith, in one of his statements, he actually said once he discovered the truth of evolution, then he realized there was no longer a need for God. And so he chose then to abandon whatever faith he had in England and became an atheist and embraced evolution. So you see, it is important, even if it may not bring someone to Christ directly, we do know that a lot of people use evolution as an excuse not to come to God, not to believe in God, and to reject the gospel anyway. So this is one of the reasons, I'm glad for that question and that was brought up. Learning creation and evolution, no, it is not a waste of time. It's very important. It was necessary for me at the time in my life to hear about it that I might be saved and listen to the gospel. All right, we're going to talk about a continuance from last night. We were talking about design arguments and evidence for design. We talked about the DNA molecule. I love that. I think that's simple enough for us to explain to people. What do you think? Do you feel like that if you were in conversation and someone said, well, everything just came to be by accident, do you think that you could talk about the SETI program? What does that mean again? Search for extraterrestrial intelligence in outer space. We're looking for aliens out in space, okay? We pretty well conclude it's not going to be Martians, but we're looking for some sort of intelligent life out there. And we're sending out simple signals, aren't we? And what is the thinking behind this that justifies spending millions of dollars sending signals out into outer space and then setting up our antennas gathering information from outer space? What justifies that? Anybody know?
That some intelligent being might see what is being broadcast as from another intelligent being.
That's right. And how will they see it? How will they recognize it? Well, the thinking is if they're intelligent, they'll be able to recognize and distinguish between an intelligent design from a natural design. Now, what is the evolutionists arguing against there when we use it for intelligent design? You can't use intelligent design because that means you'd have to put God in a test tube and you'd have to know His purpose and intent of creation. Hogwash. That has nothing to do with it. That's getting the cart before the horse. We have to determine if God created before we worry about why He created it. And creation science doesn't even bother with that issue anyway. They're not trying to determine why God created. They're simply setting up a model that we explain creation by a design, by God. In the beginning, God created. Now, like I said, there's a number of different creation science models out there. But intelligent design, the intelligent design movement, we got down in Washington. I forget where we are here. Where's Washington?
No,
Okay. Okay, that way. All right. Thank you. Now, Washington down here, you got Discovery Institute, which specializes in the intelligent design movement. and are the front men for that particular effort. Intelligent design, all they're looking for is intelligent design and pattern in creation. They're not even calling that or attributing that design to God. They're simply looking for design in creation. Now, the reason why I'm pointing that out is when you listen to the evolutionists, and this is part of another question that was raised last night to me, and that is the evolutionists are in the business of redefining words and putting spin on words, which creates confusion. All right? I'm going to deal a little bit more with some other terms later on. But this is very, very important to have straight. Intelligent design deals strictly with patterns of design in creation. Not attributing this to God or anything else. Just, hey, there seems to be the appearance of intelligent design. Period. All right? Creation science models plural, because they might have different gods, they go the next step, and that is in the creation science model, the scientists are attributing that design to God. And depending on the scientists involved and their particular belief about which God, that's going to influence what kind of creation model they're working with. All right? Which brings us then to Bible science. Bible science goes beyond science and is now relying, in addition to the science, revelation. Where we know that from the Bible that God used 6 days to create everything. Well, we wouldn't know He did it in 6 days. We wouldn't know if He had done it in 8 days, 10 days, 12 days. We wouldn't be able to know that just by studying the creation. We wouldn't know the number of days. We wouldn't know that there was a man named Noah. We wouldn't know that God used an ark to preserve animals on earth. We wouldn't know that except by revelation. But what we do then is we take the revelation in Bible science and we say, all right, how can we show that science actually verifies or supports that particular revelation or claim in the Bible? So there you have a blending of science and revelation together in Bible science. So that's the distinction between intelligent design, creation science, and Bible science. Here's why that's so important. The evolutionists lose the battle arguing and debating against intelligent design and creation science. Now, in the field of, when you get into Revelation, that's outside the boundaries of the science laboratory. And so we cannot argue that case in that field. We don't have the empirical evidence. We can use supportive evidence and coincidental evidence to support the Bible, but it's based on revelation, and so we don't have the credibility to bring that into the laboratory. However, we do have the credibility of a scientific model called the creation science model, or even intelligent design. The evolutionists are redefining the words, or I should say, trying to confuse the issue by saying it's all religion, it's all the same. Creation science, if you've read any of their criticism, you see and hear the evolutionists saying, well, creation science is just disguised Christian religion coming and being trying to infiltrate into our classrooms. That's not the case. Or they say intelligent design is just religion. You see, by doing that, now they have made the intelligent design model and the creation science model illegitimate and unfit to go into the classroom or into our science labs. And so that's why they're playing with these words and trying to say, oh, it's all the same. No, it's not all the same. All right, and some of you might have questions about that that we can clarify if I've not explained that enough for you. But I'll be glad to do that. Another approach, talking about defining words, is not only are critics trying to blend and combine intelligent design, creation science, modeling, and Bible science all together in one lump to make it all religious. By the way, In 1981 in Arkansas, the state legislature had passed a bill requiring that equal time be given to the creation science model alongside of evolution. It was called the Balanced Treatment Act. Judge Overton was overseeing a lawsuit led by the ACLU for separation of church and state issues and that sort of thing. Why? Because they said it's religion. And that was the argument. You're bringing religion into the classroom. It doesn't, I'll tell you, reading Judge Overton's opinion, what he did, it came down to creation science is religion, has no place in the science classroom, and so he dismissed it. That was the basis. You see, they were very successful. Why? They are controlling the definitions of the words. I'm telling you that so that you can be part of the army of communicators that needs to pump out that information. That creation science is not Bible science, and intelligent design theorists are not creation scientists. That is, they're not. They might believe in God. They believe in different types of gods, but the point is they are simply looking for patterns. That's legitimate science. So, see, this is just strategy. This is strategy that's going on. And spinning of words and issues, and we're probably familiar enough with that in the politically correct environment, that there's a certain approach to how you use words or define words that makes a difference.
Straight going.
Okay.
Testing.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, so okay. Now, speaking of evolution, see what they're trying to do with regard to religion. I had a student grew up in our church and went through science classes with me. I'm a volunteer teacher, science teacher at the Fayetteville Christian High School, and then she was part of our Leadership Training Institute of America. And Jenny, did you ever go there? I didn't think so, but you need to.
I know.
Okay, yeah. See, now I got you on the spot. You're committed. You said yes, I did. But anyway, Kendall did such a great job. Sitting in her freshman biology class, Dr. Spiegel began to teach a lesson on evolution, introducing that in the chapter. And she raised her hand, started asking questions that I teach students to ask. Because you don't want to challenge a professor in the classroom. You want to ask questions. And when you're dealing with a professor in the classroom, you don't have to agree to impress them. You don't have to agree with them, and they don't have to agree with you for them to like you if you're inquisitive. And if you ask questions and probing questions, they love it. Why? Because that's why they're there. They're educators. They love the information. They love discovery. They love curiosity. And when they find a student who's really interested in a subject matter, even if you disagree, man, you've got the attention of that scientist. And so asking questions is very important. Well, Kendall began to ask questions when he raised the issue of evolution. And by the end of class, he said, well, I'm not prepared to answer these questions. We may not need this anymore.
Yeah, I'm having more trouble figuring any of those words.
That's fine.
Okay.
I didn't use this last night, so I think we'll be fine. Okay. Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah. Okay, fine. All right. Well, Kendall was asking these questions. Dr. Spiegel said, well, I'm not prepared to answer these questions today. And the class began to laugh at him. You got about 300 students or so in the lecture hall. And that was not her intent, but it was spontaneous because here the freshman student was asking the professor, he couldn't answer the questions, and they thought, well, that's funny, haha. And he said, now you come back next class, I'll be ready for you. Okay. So Wednesday, they came back to class, and Dr. Spiegel, she said he had one book in his hand, and when class started, it turns out to be Webster's Dictionary. And so he read the definition of science, basically a quest for truth and discovery and the scientific method, observation, interpretation, experimentation. He said, creation science is religion. Therefore, it has no place in the science room. End of discussion. So that was his answer. See, I'm telling you, this is how they are approaching this subject. This is how they are establishing a stronghold in science. They're censoring the message. They're redefining words, and they're saying that this creation business is all about religion. Well, what about evolution? That falls into the camp of atheism, doesn't it? You see, its association or usage by some sort of religion or non-religion is irrelevant. The question is, does the science point us to a supernatural origin? That's the big deal. And so we need to be careful about, or we need to recognize what's going on here. Okay. I wanted to cover that point, wrap up that loose end raised from last night. All right, now, fine-tune argument. What is fine-tuning argument? This is an amazing study, because in all of creation here, we have, like I said, it's estimated that the universe spans such a distance that it would take light. If you're standing at the edge of the universe and shined a laser, it would take 18 billion years for that light to reach the other side. Now that's a long ways. Why? And I pointed out that if we were to shine a flashlight for 1 second, that light beam would travel a distance 7 times around the Earth in 1 second. So when you're talking about 18 billion years of light traveling at the speed of light, you're talking about a long, long distance. Now, with all that material, all this organization, from the smallest particles that make up the universe to the largest in our galaxies and so on, everything exists because there has been a very fine tuning of the universe, such that if you were to take 800 different variables that have been identified that are involved in making up things, the particles, I mean, the very paper that exists here, this paper exists. Have you ever wondered why these paper molecules are not just floating around in the air? Doesn't that just bother you? And think about, why does this stick together? And why is it that I can rip that and this material is not the same, and I can't rip that as easily? I mean, you know, it's sort of puzzling. What makes that possible? When you get down to the atomic structure, you have different materials, from the hydrogen to the helium, the beryllium, the lithium, and so on, right down to uranium. We have 92 naturally occurring atoms in our world. And now there's more. There's about 128 or so that have been identified, but everything after 92 has been man-made. Did you know man can make atoms? Isn't that incredible? I mean, man making atoms. That's amazing. Now, they're unstable. They don't last very long, just long enough to say, something was there. And that's about it. So it's unstable. Uranium, you've heard of uranium. It's highly unstable and radioactive. Why? Because it's such a huge conglomeration of protons and neutrons. It's just unstable. It's breaking down, decaying into something smaller and more stable. So that's what's going on there. But in the fine-tuning of the universe, what allows paper molecules to be different from wood molecules and plastic and leather and everything else, and it allows water to freeze on top instead of freezing and dropping and sinking to the bottom, and freezing on the top and sinking to the bottom. Can you imagine the dead fish and the dead life that would be in the oceans? Because if the ice wasn't floating, it would be dropping to the bottom, building up, and you'd have a solid ice cube from top to bottom. There wouldn't be any life. You have water in liquid form under all the ice, because when it hardens, it floats to the surface, and that's something you guys know about a lot up here. Now, what makes that possible? What makes it possible is that the very particles that make up creation, whether it be the atoms, whether it be the subatomic particles like protons, neutrons, electrons, quarks, leptons, baryons. What else is there? Oh yeah, well, muons, yeah, we could talk about muons, bosons, Higgs boson. There's a lot of little things that make up the atom itself, the atoms of the atom. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's where we get into string theory. And what is string theory? Now, string theory is the idea that everything in the universe, even space, exists because it's made of something. And that's why you have this, nothing is really something. I mean, when you suck everything out of space and you have just a vacuum, why does that space actually exist? Why can light pass through it? Strings. Well, these strings are not like long woven strings throughout space, but rather they're tiny little loops of energy that are vibrating at different frequencies. And think about your little spirographs. When you know how you do your spirographs and you try and line it up from beginning to end, and you can have different frequencies, and you line all that up. That is a perfect picture and description of strings. Tiny little strings that are so small that they're smaller in relationship to an atom than an atom is to your body. That's how small those strings are. Now it's theoretical. But it fits the model, and it measures up to a lot of explanation that we have. So we've got, the point I'm making here is, what makes our world what it is? About 800 some variables have been identified. And let me run through this with you. I'm just going to run through about 7. Okay? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Just enough to show you how fantastic some of this stuff is. The strong nuclear force. Strong nuclear force, you have 2 protons in a helium atom and more. You've got 6 in a carbon. But you've got 2 protons in a helium and they're stuck together. You know what their charge is? Positive. What do you know about magnets when you put two magnets together, 2 north ends or 2 south ends together with a magnet? What do? They repel each other. And yet in the atom they're stuck together. What's holding them together? Strong nuclear force. That's what it is. Strong nuclear force holds positive protons together, but you only actually experience the power, the force of that strong nuclear force at molecular distances. All right, that's all I'm going to say about that. Just to make the point here that there has been identified a strong nuclear force. A weak nuclear force holds neutrons together. And then you've got gravity, which just recently, in fact last year, they think that they may have found the very particle that makes up, or that gives us some sort of force for gravity. If it is confirmed that they have found Higgs boson, then that's going to be a remarkable achievement and give us some insight into more creation, because it's the last remaining force that has not been found of the 4 fundamental forces. The 4th fundamental force is the electromagnetic energy. All right, what does all that mean? If the strong nuclear force were just slightly stronger, we would not have helium. Helium would not exist, and yet helium is an essential element for life to function. If it was slightly less, then there would be no carbon or oxygen or anything else that we need, because the protons would be flying apart. So all you would have is helium. You either have too much helium or you're not going to have helium at all, just with a slight different value of strong nuclear force. Now, I see that you're really trying hard to understand what this is all about and the significance. Here's the significance. And by the way, this is only one point. There's some 800 variables like this. with the strong nuclear force. In evolutionary theory, everything originates with the Big Bang. And at that instant, that moment of Big Bang, all of the forces came into being at that time. The law of thermodynamics came into being at that time. The strong nuclear forces were I'll say invented, or they came into being at that particular time. This weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic, the atoms, the strings, everything came into being instantaneously at that moment of the Big Bang. Now, when you consider how delicate life is on Earth and what it takes, and you look at 800 variables, just something accidentally exploding, how many different ways, how many different values could have popped into existence at the Big Bang? It's almost infinity. I mean, it's innumerable, all the possible combinations. And yet we have all of these 800 identifiable variables fine-tuned to just the most precise value that it allows us to have a world that we live in. This world should not exist. That's the significance of it. The probability of this world, this creation, existing with the values that it possesses should not be here by accident, and in fact cannot be here by accident. And there are a lot of physicists who have come to the conclusion there must be a first cause. Why? Because we exist. I mean, this world, considering all the wide range of possibilities, should not exist. Why is there an electron? It just accidentally came into being? With that particular value of strength and force, it just happened by accident? And then you start enumerating. I'm not going to go through all these because you probably heard enough already. But the point is, when you start thinking about all the range of values that is possible for just strong nuclear force, and then apply that 800 times for each one. Whoa, it's mind-boggling. And it's convincing, and has convinced particle theorists to think that there definitely has to be a first cause. All right, let's go on to something easier here. We're going to get into more of an outline format here. Design evidence for supernatural origins includes, in summary, complex non-random design of the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule is far more complex as a signal of information than any signal we're transmitting into outer space. And if we can imagine that intelligent life should recognize the simplicity of our signals, how much more we should recognize that an intelligent designer is behind our genetic code. All right? Complex design and function of our organs. And I went through that last night with the brain and the eye, for example. Body symmetry, complex design and behavior, irreducible complexity, we talked about the flagella, and fine-tuning. This all speaks to, as a collection, it screams intelligent designer. That's what it does. All right. Let's look at a very important way of thinking and organizing our information. And we're shifting gears a little bit here. What we've been emphasizing is the design in creation. The smallest level to the biggest level. But now I want to shift gears, and I use this as an example, and I believe Doug, okay, he's shaking his head yes, he knows what I'm going to say. He's got this outline memorized, and he gave a testimony. In fact, Doug, why don't you just come up and give your testimony, because you'll do a better job than I did, of the professor at UAA. Because this is very important. This will show you the importance of having this information organized in your mind.
I shared with Cowboy Church. I went to visit a friend who happens to be an architect. Didn't call him that I was on my way or anything. I showed up at his office there, And when I walk in, the first thing I hear was this argument going on. Oh, you're stupid if you believe that. And they were kind of going back and forth. And I just kind of kept my mouth quiet there for a while. And it was, name calling, and they were going back and forth, can't believe this and everything else. And finally, my friend Richard, he says, Doug, tell him. Or he actually said, Pastor, tell him. I made a couple conditions. I said, well, I'd be happy to share with you first of all, but I says I didn't say anything because I don't want to feel like you to feel like we're ganging up on you. I had no idea that you were here. I said, so my first condition is that Richard, you got to be quiet when I'm talking, so that we're not ganging up on you. And then the second thing, I just want you to be able to keep an open mind as I go through this. And I went in and I said, the other thing I'm asking is save your questions to the end, and I'll be happy to answer whatever I can. But let me go through there, and if there's something that's really pressing, let me know. And I went through this outline, and it was, for those of you, I think Gary gave out the Why I Rejected Christ, or Why I Rejected Evolution. I have the whole pamphlet memorized except for the title of it. But why I Rejected Evolution, I believe that you've received those. I know that I gave those out in Cowboy Church on Sunday. And basically, to go through that outline that's in there. And what I did is I just started from point 1 and I went all the way through. When I got done with that presentation, he said, you've given me a lot to think about it. Can I get back with you? I said, sure. I left and I gave him my phone number and I forgot all about it. About a month later, I received a phone call. Hey, this is so-and-so, and I met him for coffee. We sat down and he asked me a lot of questions. We spent about an hour and a half together, and I answered his questions the best I could and went through. Okay, thank you. About a month later, he called me back up and we went through some questions again as to what was holding him up. And at the end of that time, I finally just told him, I says, right now what you're doing is you're running away from what you know is really true. The person and the supernatural that created this is God, and He wants to be your Savior. I went through the plan of salvation with him and asked him if he would like to do that, and he did accept Christ. But it was just a phenomenal thing, but it goes back to, and I was sharing this, I called Pat right away when this happened, and I was excited about that. But the whole thing was, and I was telling Pat the other day, I don't think it was anything other than I was showing him respect, he was showing me respect, but it was a very systematic approach to answering these, and then he didn't have any answer he could not come up with an answer to rebuff this by any means. So, yeah.
As I point out in my lectures, and it's really hard to understand why, but I point out this is the most important thing you'll learn in my lectures. The reason for that, it's about communication. Last week at the University of Minnesota, after I did my presentation on the credibility of the creation science model, a biology professor came up and thanked me for the organization material. The reason for that is the outlining it by origin of universe, origin of life, origin of species shows you how to keep your arguments separated, your evidences separated. Because the arguments for the origin of the universe are not appropriate for the origin of life. And the arguments for origin of life are not appropriate for the origin of species, and vice versa. And so what happens when you hear a typical debate between a creationist and an evolutionist, or you read material from a creationist or an evolutionist, oftentimes the information is all jumbled together. And that's what the professor was thanking me for last week. He said, I really appreciate the fact that you use the right arguments for the right topic. You see, that doesn't always happen. In fact, it happens less frequently than it ought to. So this outline is about communicating effectively. And once you identify where the debate points are, then you can go to the laboratory and find the evidence for that appropriate question. Otherwise, you're just throwing out a bunch of information, right? And oftentimes we come with a background. Hey, I thought of 10 arguments and 10 reasons. You only thought of 8. I win. It doesn't matter how good my arguments are, as long as I have more than you. You know, I operate in a different world. All I need is one good argument. And if it's one good argument and it proves you wrong, it doesn't matter how many arguments you got. Because 10 bad arguments does not make anything right. It's all about the quality of the argument. And that's what I'm giving you. So for each one of these, I've only got a couple of evidences for each one. But I'll guarantee you, when you use them, an evolutionist is going to be hard-pressed to give an answer or rebuttal. That's what Kendall found in the classroom. And even on the spot in front of 300 students, the professor could not answer the questions and had to admit, I don't have answers to these questions at this time. And the following lecture, he still didn't have answers. He dismissed it saying it's religion, and therefore he doesn't have to answer the questions anymore. Except, as Kendall said, from that, for the rest of the semester, it didn't matter what he had to say. The students did not believe anything he had to say. Why? Because he discredited himself. Because he did not treat the material honestly. And the students saw right through that. All right. So let's look at this, how we can use this. Origin of universe, origin of life, and origin of species. We'll look at this, the first case here, origin of universe. And the reason why we start out with origin of universe before life and before species is because we're working forward. In the beginning, God created everything, first of all, and now we're going to move forward, all right? I'll show you why that's significant, particularly on Friday, because the evolutionists are going to work backwards. And that's why when they're in a debate, the evolutionist is arguing speciation, the creationist is arguing universe, and the two never meet in between, so they're not communicating. And that's why it's important. When you are studying a book, listening to a debate, listening to a lecture, you keep this outline in mind, then you know where to put that information appropriately, even if the information's being thrown at you in a jumbled order. You now know, oh, that's origin of the universe argument, that's origin of life, that's origin of species. And you can make sense out of it. All right. For the origin of the universe, there's only 2 laws of science that you need to know about. 2 laws. That doesn't seem like enough. You got to get that number of evidences out of your mind. You go for quality. And with these 2, you're not going to need anything else. Now, the first law of thermodynamics is also known as the law of conservation of matter, or the conservation of energy. It's most appropriately referred to as the conservation of energy. We're talking about the origin of energy, the flow of energy, the dynamics of energy. So it's the thermodynamics. First law of thermodynamics. Now, thermo, I told you last night, I'll teach you how to say that word. Thermo, like thermos, and dynamic, like a dynamic personality. So you put it together and you got thermodynamics. Or just drop the S, thermodynamics. See, that's easy. Now, when you say that, those that you talk to, they'll say, Uncle, you win. So, thermodynamics. You want to practice that word. So it flows right out of your mouth. All right, now, here's what the first law of thermodynamics says. Energy is not created nor destroyed. And in fact, it is an empirically derived science, a scientific law. If you recall last night, interpretations and modeling progresses from hypothesis to theory to law. And law is the closest thing you got to proof, but it's not proof. It's a law of science. Because a scientist doesn't claim to know everything of all that there is to know in perfect logic, so he always has to have the back door open and say, tomorrow we might discover that I was wrong today. But a credible model and explanation, remember, is based on what we know today, not what we hope to find tomorrow. All right? There's nothing wrong with looking for something new tomorrow, but credible explanations and models must conform to the laws that we know today. All right, so the first law of thermodynamics is all about energy. I might also point out that this law, since we're only talking about creation, not the destruction of energy, we can also put it as the energy cannot be created, or cannot create itself, or cannot be created by natural means. That's how I like to put it. So I do have some opponents, some adversaries, who they just go wild over that. You can't find that in the book anywhere. That's not the definition of first law of thermodynamics. And this group used to follow me around, bring that up all the time. And the last time I asked them, so tell me what's wrong with it. That's exactly what I heard. Nothing. There was no comeback. Because there's nothing wrong with saying it. I do admit that it's redundant to say by natural means, but it emphasizes the fact that energy cannot be created by natural means. It's an empirically derived law. It's a physical law. It's a natural law derived from the natural experiences and observations of our natural world. It is not a law that applies to the supernatural. See, this is one of the reasons why I had to emphasize this. And it was a question that Ben or Colton, one of these young men here in the front, had asked me the other day. And they said, well, basically what it comes down to, well, if energy physical world cannot be created, the first law of thermodynamics says things cannot create themselves, then who made God? And that's a very good question, because it's oftentimes brought up. It needs an answer to it. But you see, the first law of thermodynamics does not apply to God. Why? Because He's not natural. He's not subject to the physical laws that He created. You see, we can't take the laws of science that we observe applied to the physical world and apply it to the supernatural. These are physical laws that apply to the physical world. And so it's not a law that applies to God. So it's important to understand that and know that why the law does not apply. And that's why I like that little tag, cannot be created by natural means. It doesn't have anything to do with supernatural. All right. So when we look at the universe, here's the significance of this. Energy cannot be created by natural means. Everything in the universe that exists is energy. You know, this thing is energy right here. Flowers are energy, our hair is energy, our bodies are energy, the floor is energy, the water is energy, light is energy, sound is energy, heat is energy. We've got energy, we're surrounded by energy. If you can feel it, see it, taste it, touch it, measure it in any way, it is energy. It's a form of energy. The chair you're sitting in is energy. It's in a form that most people don't think about. You say, well, that's matter. Matter is energy, isn't it? You know, we have Einstein's famous equation. E equals mc squared. That means energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Guess what? That shows that there's a relationship between energy and mass, or matter. In fact, a famous experiment that was done in the 1930s and repeated in the 1960s was to suck all the matter, all the air molecules out of a chamber, so you had a perfect vacuum. And then it had pressure plates on the inside. And they noticed that they were detecting particles hitting the sides of the vacuum chamber. How is that possible? They sucked everything out. It was a very important experiment because it was verifying this equation up here. That radiant energy in that form, which can pass right through material, just like X-rays pass through your body and your bones and so on. Radiation energy passed right through the glass of the chamber and in fleeting moments convert into what they call virtual particles. They come into existence, they possess mass, and then just as quickly they disappear and transfer right out of the chamber. So this is an example of how one form of energy can be converted into another form of energy. We see that happening in the bonds of wood, for example. Or paper. We light this paper on fire. We can see the potential energy in the chemical bonds here, the molecular bonds of paper, we can see the energy being released in the form of light, heat, sound. You see, we can hear that, and that is one form of energy being converted into another form of energy. And isn't it remarkable to think that you can have radiant energy converted into particle energy that has mass? But that's where the excitement came last year when they discovered the Higgs boson. Was it one of you boys asked me that question about Higgs boson? Somebody asked me about that question.
It was this boy.
Oh, okay, good.
What's a boson?
A Higgs boson is a theoretical particle, still theoretical particle. They think they might have found it because it has all the fingerprints in a super collider experiment. They think they have seen the fingerprints of what is predicted to be seen by the energy pattern of that particle. It's very brief. It's very difficult to. It's been very difficult to find. But
B-O-Z-O-N?
B-O-S-O-N.
Oh.
Higgs, because Higgs was part of the team that predicted it, and boson, B-O-S-O-N, is the particle that they're looking for, and they feel that that particular particle puts out a field of strength that gives the property of gravity. Now, if that's the case, and they're trying to verify that now this year, if that's the case, then that would be an exciting thing, because that will be the last force that they know of and predicted by the standard model of this team that will put everything together and explain why our world works the way it does. What's exciting about that is we're getting into God's blueprint, and we're understanding how God designed it and put it together. And then because God put it in there and has it designed, we have prediction power. Because when you understand the blueprints and the behavior of the most fundamental particles, now you can understand why everything works the way it does, like the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot create itself. Whatever goes into a system has to come out. Whatever doesn't go in can't come out. So it's the conservation of energy. All right. Now, everything in the universe that exists is a form of energy. The sun, the moon, the planet Earth, bodies, everything in them, even the particles that are floating around in between the planets, all of that is energy. And that's important to keep in mind. Let's see. We need to advance to the next slide. I might have to have you do that.
Your energy's not working.
Oh, the energy's out. Okay. There we go. All right. Oh, I think we skipped two. I think we skipped one. But what goes on here in the first law of thermodynamics? Yeah, okay. Here's the question that has to be raised. Is that if energy cannot create itself and everything that exists is a form of energy, then if it didn't make itself, where did it come from? Or the question is, well, who made it? Well, if it wasn't made naturally, then it must have been made supernaturally. I mean, that seems logical, doesn't it? And so we can use this line of reasoning to argue the case that the creation science model is perfectly legitimate based on the science that we know today. Now, the evolutionist is going to say, you can't say that because that's God of the gaps. So you say supernatural, we just say we don't know. And say that's all that means. No, it's not the same. Here's why. Because the first law of thermodynamics is based on what we do know, not what we don't know. And it says it didn't come about by natural means. If it didn't come about by natural means, then it's not legitimate. It might be scientific, but it's not legitimate to say that it happened naturally anyway. You see? That's what they're relying on. And that's because we have, as I told you the other night, the presumption of atheism, which translates into the presumption of naturalism, controls and has a stranglehold on our scientific community. Because regardless of where the evidence leads, we must have a natural explanation, even if it contradicts the laws of nature. It still has to be natural. So, we are not using a God of the gaps argument, if you're familiar with that. God of the gaps argument is based on I don't know, therefore God did it. That's an old, obsolete argument from the Middle Ages, from the Dark Ages. What we have right now going on is a argument based on what we do know rather than what we don't know. So this is not God of the gaps argument. This is much different, much more strong. So you're going to have to advance that for me, because this definitely is not go. Okay, thank you. So what we can conclude is that the creation science model is empirically supported, that is, physically, naturally supported by the scientific data. Okay, let's advance to the next slide. Now, here's what the evolutionists propose. They propose that there's only a natural explanation. You can't have supernatural. Something has obviously come from nothing. Next slide, please. Now, when you consider something from nothing, most people say, nah, that's not possible. How can you say that? Sure, you're a creationist just making fun of the evolutionists. You're not representing them correctly. That's why I put this quote up here. They're actually saying it. Imagine no space at all, no matter at all. To the average person, I like the way that's said. To the average person, it might seem obvious that nothing can happen in nothing. I mean, let that soak in. But to a quantum physicist, nothing is in fact something. Now, I know what they mean about this, but you see, they say this and they don't clarify what they mean. So I'm not going to clarify it either. If they want to sound this way, if they want to say things like this, and they want to put in their textbooks and in journals that way and tell people, hey, this is how we think, then fine. It sounds just as silly as it is.
I really appreciate where that quote came from, the grand guess.
Yeah, guess, grand guess. Yeah. Next slide, please. All right. Here's what it comes down to. Evolution is contradicting a known law of science, and anything that contradicts a known law of science is obviously unscientific. It doesn't merit credibility. You see, that's what I like about this. When you present this to somebody, to a professor, or I went 2 hours around with a geneticist on this after a lecture series. We stood out there in the parking lot 2 hours going around just on the laws of thermodynamics. I mean, it's not that hard to understand, is it? And we just go around circles for 2 hours. Can you imagine? I think about that. How many times did I repeat this? I mean, it doesn't go much further than what I've presented already. And at the end of 2 hours, he said, I see what you mean. I can't accept it, but I see what you mean. You see, now it came down to this point. You know who you're rejecting. You know that there's somebody there. You're just being stubborn. You don't want to admit it. And that's what he said. I just can't accept it, but I see what you mean. So, for 2 hours, he makes a good point. He had answers. He had comebacks. And that's the way it is with evolutionists. But they don't have to be good answers, and they don't have to make any sense. They just have to be explanations and answers. Don't back down. Stick your ground. You have the law of science on your side. Don't back down. All they've got is explanation, trying to figure out how they're going to explain why and how things came to be, even though the law of science says it can't. All right? You have all the evidence on your side. Okay, next slide. Now, second law of thermodynamics, this is why you need this law. One of the comebacks and rebuttals of evolutionists will be, well, energy didn't have to create itself, it's always been here. All right. So we have to deal with that. All right, here is what you use. You use the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics, and I like this word unusable energy, just to communicate it, but it's called entropy, and when you think about entropy, think about chaos, all right? That chaos will always increase, or entropy will always increase, or unusable energy will always increase within a closed system. As everything tends towards disorder, everything's winding down, a clock is winding down. Now, I used the clock illustration the other night. If I have a clock sitting here, and I wind it up, that's an open system, because I'm getting to the clock, and I'm winding it up. I'm putting energy that I received when I was eating dinner, and I put that into the clock. And now dinner is in the clock, and it's wound up, and now it's tick, 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 tick. But if I don't put any more energy into it, it's going to go tick, 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 tock. And it runs down. That is the second law of thermodynamics. Everything's running down. That's maximizing energy, okay? Ultimately, where all that energy went in the spinning of clocks and the wheels and the springs is heat energy. That's what it is. Now, if I were to put this clock inside of a case and nobody could get into it, that's a closed system, because you can't get to it. And as long as you can't get into the system, it's a closed system, and no one can get to the clock to wind it up, it's going to go tick, 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 tock. And in a closed system, it will never tick again. Here's the application. The universe is like a giant clock. Next slide, please. It's like a giant clock. It's all wound up, and it's ticking. Oh, here, this was a little more explanation here. Chaos and disorder. Next slide, please. And this is a little more description. Let me just go through this. The entropy is why you don't see water running uphill. It always runs downhill. It's always running down to the lowest state of energy. Next slide. It's why eggs don't put themselves back together, because the entropy to organize and put together, the energy is too great. You can't put things together. Entropy is called the arrow of time. Some things are never going to be put back together. Next slide. Here you never see energy coming out of the atmosphere and putting themselves and assembling themselves as logs into houses and organizing. This is the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, in action. That's why a time machine is impossible. Because for a time machine to reverse, you'd have to have waterfalls going uphill, eggs putting themselves back together, fire coming back out of the atmosphere and putting houses back together. That can't happen. Entropy is the arrow of time and keeps everything moving in one direction and prevents a reversal. Next slide, please. And even death. That's why we can't reverse that process either. That's part of God's design. All right, next slide, please. All right, so knowing that entropy is the arrow of time, it prevents the reversal of time, we're not going to have a time machine. Next slide, please. All right, clocks do not wind themselves up. They're going to tick, 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 tock until someone else comes along and winds it up. Next slide. Now, the universe is like a giant clock. You got the sun in our solar system and planets spinning around just like gears in a clock. All these mechanisms and all this motion. And then our galaxy floating around in the arm of galaxies in the Milky Way. And the Milky Way spinning and twirling. And tell you what, when you put the whole universe together, it's all in motion of such complexity and such balance. It's fantastic the way it is designed. Now, here we've got we're sitting in the middle of a gigantic clock. Where did all this energy come from so we can witness this clock in motion? You see, if you walked up here and you saw a clock ticking, you would immediately assume someone wound it up, right? Well, we're sitting in the middle of a gigantic clock that's ticking. If it's been ticking, next slide please, we have to ask the question, if the clock is ticking, who wound it up? That's what's going on in the second law of thermodynamics. We have to ask the question, who wound up the universe? Now the universe is unwinding. That ultimate endpoint is called heat death. The arrow of time, that arrow of entropy is taking us to that end point. Next slide, please. Now, here's a great point. If there's an end point, then there must have been a beginning point. Now, this is not the beginning point of energy. They might say, well, energy's always been here. But if you have an end point, when we're talking about the end point of the universe, we're talking about the end point of organized energy. And so if there's an end point of organized energy, then there must have been a beginning point of organized energy. Someone must have wound it up in the beginning. So where there's an end, there has to be a beginning. That's the big deal here. Next slide, please. So then if the universe is unwinding and it can't wind itself up by natural means, then it must have been wound up supernaturally. I mean, you got it hands down. Why? You've got the law of science on your side. That's why. So what is the evolutionist left with? Explanations, trying to explain how it happened in spite of the natural laws that are known today. Next slide, please. The universe can't wind itself up. Must have been wound up supernaturally. Next slide. The creation science model is supported by what? Empirical data. Is that religion? No, we got that right out of the science laboratory. That's our research. That's our field research. That's observation. That's good science. That's why I can take this into a university setting and present the credibility of the creation science model as a scientific model. Next slide, please. Now, here's what evolutionists offer. They propose only natural explanations. But that means it's contradicting a natural law, which says it can't happen that way. Next slide, please. Well, it proposed that all this order came out of an explosion. You know, the only time that you ever see this orderly organization of the universe, from the Big Bang to everything, the only time you ever see that is in a textbook. It's always painted. There's no photographs, no videos, no nothing. Now, next slide, please. What do you actually see whenever there's an explosion? Well, this is what we see. Chaos and a mess. Have you ever seen, has there ever been an exception to the case that when you see an explosion, you suddenly see more organization than what it started out to be? And yet we're supposed to believe that out of the biggest bang of all, we have this incredible order and design? That is counterintuitive. That doesn't make sense at all. So the only time you see all this organization order come to pass out of an explosion is from the textbooks. Our next slide, please. So evolution is contradicting a law of science. And explanations that contradict laws of science are clearly unscientific. Lacking credibility. Next slide, please. Now, doesn't that seem simple? I mean, you can do that. And you just get hold of, remember, origin of the universe. We're not talking about origin of life, origin of species. It's the origin of the universe. Lock it down, and just like a pit bull on an ankle, it won't let go. You got to hang on there and don't let go, because you've got the science on your side. So, next slide, please. The only explanation that is consistent with and supported by empirical scientific evidence is the creation science model. It's the only one. It is the very best explanation for the origin of energy and the origin of the universe. Next. Now, Sir Arthur Eddington, a number of years ago, said if your theory be found against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you nothing, but I can give you no. I mean, when you're working against the laws of science, it's just not going to work in your favor. And Gordon Van Wylen, chairman of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Michigan, he said, the question that arises is how the universe got into the state of reduced entropy, reduced chaos, that is, it got wound up, in the first place, since all natural processes known to us tend to increase in entropy. The author has found that the second law of thermodynamics tends to increase conviction that there is indeed a creator. What do you think about that? Next slide, please. All right.
I'm just going to say one thing that you stressed last time when we talked, when I learned this, is the verbiage error. At this point, I never say God. I say supernatural.
Oh, yes. Okay.
At that point, because I saved that towards the end. But that was something she stressed last time, so I thought it was important.
Okay, what's being brought up here is when I'm in a secular setting, I do avoid saying that this is God. And what you see on the slides here is supernatural versus natural. The reason for that is I'm presenting a case for the creation science model based on an intelligent designer. If I introduce God, now I'm introducing the philosophical rationale to derive God from the supernatural. I think that that is very logical, and I'm going to show you that in a couple nights. But it is something that I am very careful about doing in a secular audience. I point out that the evidence says if it's not natural, it had to be supernatural. And then once I conclude all of this, I say, now, let's see if we can derive what or who this supernatural is. And then we take the line of reasoning and we go with the size of the universe, which means this must be an enormous intelligent designer. And intelligence suggests that there's an IQ, but also a personality associated with this. And the fine-tuning suggests it's a compassionate designer who put everything in place with intent for life to exist on Earth. And when you start summing up that here you have an intelligent personality who is compassionate, of enormous size and power, you know, that sounds like the God of the Bible. So we can argue that case. And I've got a slide for you on that later. But this evening, I think what we'll do is we'll conclude with our origin of the universe sets of arguments. And I'll take any questions that you have. There might be some clarifications that are needed. But this is just dealing with the origin of the universe. Not life yet, not species, just origin of the universe. You've got all the science on your side. It's a good, credible model. I've had a number of professors who have said, this makes the creation science model credible. Why? Because I'm not appealing to revelation. I'm just taking the science that already exists and saying, look, let's follow the evidence where it leads. You cannot lose the debate. You got the science on your side. Yes, ma'am.